I'll go ahead and kick it off. So thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon for our webinar on Social Security. I have the pleasure of introducing Dave Ghormley, who will be our host today. So Dave is a senior regional consultant at MFS Investments, and we use MFS for one of our international funds. So with that, we get access to Dave and all of his expertise in the lovely presentation that he has put together for us today. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, please know there's a Q&A section at the bottom, and you can just type those in. They won't show up for everybody. So Emily Palmer on our team will be monitoring those questions. If you haven't met Emily, she is our financial planner on staff, and she is also a registered Social Security analyst. So really a wealth of knowledge here. So please utilize this to ask any general questions you might have about Social Security, but also if you have questions particular to your own situation, she is available as a resource to help go as in-depth as you'd like after this webinar. So this will be recorded. You can always access it later, but I will go ahead and pass it over to Dave, and then Emily will kind of jump in towards the end. So Dave, are you ready to get started?
Absolutely.
Perfect. I'll pass it on over to you.
All righty, great. Let me share my screen standpoint to really give you that more personalized and nuanced idea of what might make sense. But with that said, in order to better understand the system, we wanted to take some time today and really walk through a couple key items. First, how retirement benefits are calculated. Second, we'll talk about options for married couples and divorcees. And finally, we'll spend a very brief amount of time talking about taxes and your retirement plan. The goal today is just to give you more confidence and conviction and ultimately how the system works, what might make sense to you from a claiming standpoint, and then again, I would suggest circling back and spending some time with Emily and getting some more pinpoint idea of what might make sense in your situation. So let's jump into it, how retirement benefits are calculated. First and foremost, 60% of individuals don't know their full retirement age. You'll hear me refer to this, as you can see on the screen here, as your full retirement age is your FRA, right? And this is based on the calendar year in which you were born. So if you were born in 1954 or earlier, the full retirement age is 66. If you were born in 1960 or later, the full retirement age is 67. Every year in between, your full retirement age increases, as you can see here, by 2 weeks. So 1955, 66 and 2 months, 1956, 66 and 4 months, so on and so forth. So said a different way, your full retirement age is going to be 66, 67, or somewhere in between based on the calendar in which you were born. Now, how does that ultimately, what is the implication on that on your benefit itself? Well, as you probably are aware, there are reductions in your benefit if you take before that full retirement age. There are what the system is called as delayed retirement credits. If you wait beyond that full retirement age, and regardless of whether your full retirement age is 66, which is the left-hand side chart that you can see, or 67, which is on the right-hand side, you can take as early as 62, or you can delay to as late as 70. So again, regardless of what your full retirement age is, you can take as early as 62, you can delay to as late as 70. And ultimately, that full retirement age is the fulcrum on which these penalties for taking early, these permanent reductions, and or these benefits or credits for waiting, that's what that shifts on if you like to see something. Now, a couple numbers at the top of the page that I think should be a little bit larger because they're important to know. 40 quarters. So you need 40 quarters worth of income to qualify for a social security benefit. In other words, you need 10 years worth of earned income to qualify for a benefit. The number that's probably a little bit more important than that even is 35. Social Security takes your highest 35 years of career earnings. They don't need to be consecutive. And they basically adjust up till age 60 your previous years of income with inflation. And then they take what's called the AIM, the average index monthly earnings, from that figure to determine ultimately what your end retirement benefit will be for Social Security. So if you have 30 years of earnings history, you're going to get 5 5 zeros. They're going to use 35 years worth of numbers regardless. So that's important to know. If you have 40 years of earnings history, as I mentioned, they will cherry pick the highest 35 of those 40. So just important to know that, and they will continue to readjust your benefit even if you continue working beyond your full retirement age and you're collecting Social Security. So if you're replacing those lower 35 years in terms of your earnings history, you can see your benefit actually. So as I mentioned, the full retirement age, as you can see in both of these charts, is just represented by the 100%. So as you can see, if you take it 62, there's a reduction. The reduction is just a little bit steeper for someone with an FRA of 67 versus the FRA of 66. As a simple example, let's say that my full retirement age benefit is $2,000 a month. If my full retirement age is 66 and I choose to take it 62, I will have a 25% permanent reduction in that benefit. So instead of collecting $2,000 a month if I waited until full retirement age, starting at 62, I would be getting $1,500 a month. If my full retirement age were 67 years old, instead of $1,500 a month at a 25% reduction, as you can see on this chart on the right-hand side, it's a 30% reduction. So that would be in that example, a $2,000 full retirement age benefit reduction of 30%, $1,400 a month. Now, one thing that's a little misleading about these charts that I like to point out, it makes it look like the increase in your benefit is a stair-step function each year that you turn a specific age. Your benefit increases every single month. Okay, so it would actually be more of a line as opposed to being stair steps. One other thing I like to point out, and I'll use the right-hand side of the chart to do so, but as you can see, the increase in the first couple of years, meaning if I decided to not take it 62 and I wait until 63, 4, etc., in those first couple of years, it's a 5% increase in the benefit. So the reduction goes from 30% to 25% to 20%. In either case, whether I'm in full retirement age of 66, 67, or somewhere in between, once you get within 3 years of your full retirement age, that benefit starts increasing at 6 2/3%. So you can see that as we approach full retirement age on the right-hand side. Once we delay beyond full retirement age, your benefit increases simply at 8% simple every single year. Okay, so you can see the maximum benefit for someone in full retirement age 67 would be 124% at age 70. On the left-hand side of curve 66, it's just a little bit higher maximum benefit, and at age 70, 132%. Going back to our example we just gave, but if I have a full retirement benefit of $2,000, my full retirement age is 66. If I should delay all the way till age 70 to start my benefit would be 132% of 2,000, which is $2,640 a month. Exact same example over here, the 124% of that $2,000 FRA benefit, so $2,480 a month. Now, what I ask you to consider, and this is really important in terms of kind of foundationally understanding Social Security, is if you have a scenario, regardless of whether your FRA is 66, 67, somewhere in between, if you have a scenario where if I take early, I have a lower benefit, and if I delay, I have a higher benefit, we have a little bit of a bird in the hand versus two in the bush type scenario from a longevity standpoint. And what I mean by that is, there is an age at which point in the future, if we live beyond that age, there's a crossover. In other words, if I took earlier because I'm getting less money every month, if I live past a certain age, I actually will have collected more from Social Security in aggregate, cumulatively, if I delay starting with a higher dollar. The example I like to give here, especially in Indiana, since we're coming up on May here, it's almost racing season for us, right, is a car race. Imagine I started a car going 70 miles an hour, and then let's just use the full retirement age of 67 as my base example. So my car is going 70 miles an hour. Let's say the years here are analogous to hours. 5 hours later, I start a car going 100 miles per hour, right? So I'm doing a 30% reduction on that 100 miles per hour is where I got that 70 miles per hour. So I had a car that started at 70 miles per hour. 5 hours later, I started a car going 100 miles per hour. And then 8 hours after that first car started, I have a car going 124 miles per hour. Well, we all know if they're running on the same track, it's only a matter of time before that first car gets lapped. And actually, that second car is eventually going to get lapped by that third car as well, because it's going the fastest of all three. And if it's keeping that speed up, it'll never look back, right? Those ages, and I'm just asking you to consider for a moment if you isolated your own benefit, because obviously it adds a lot more dynamic when we think about spousal and survivorship and some of these other nuanced parts of Social Security, which we will discuss this afternoon. But if we just isolate your own benefit for a moment, that crossover in terms of age from 62 to full retirement age, this is whether your full retirement age is 66, 67, or somewhere in between, is around 78 years old. So the crossover again, 62 versus full retirement. So electing to wait as opposed to taking it at 62. If I live beyond 78 years old, I actually have collected more money from delaying and collecting it full retirement. Okay? The crossover from starting at 62 and waiting all the way until 70 is around 82 years old. So waiting till 70, that 124 mile per hour car in our example, that actually around 82, that passes that first car going 70 miles per hour. So just gives you a little bit of perspective. And I always tell folks, if I could flip over the collar on your shirt, see the day you're going to be with the Lord above, I can tell you within a minute of when you should take Social Security, right? But thank goodness we don't know when that's going to be. But it does, again, create a little bit of a scenario of one in the hand versus two in the bush. I think that's absolutely fundamental to understanding what might make sense given your health history, your family history of longevity. And I'll give a personal example of that a little bit later on. Another item I want to cover today, and I hate to cover it because it's a frustrating part of Social Security, but it's really important to understand, is known as the earnings test limit. So I'm sure a lot of you on this call right now are familiar with the earnings test limit. It only applies. I'm going to start from the right-hand side of this slide and then jump to the left. No restrictions once you get full retirement. This is not, the end of the calendar year in which you turn. It's as soon as you hit full retirement age, you're good to go. Said a different way, you can take as much money as you want and take Social Security at full retirement age or later, and none of your benefits will be withheld. Now let's jump to the left-hand side. If, however, you start your Social Security benefit prior to full retirement age, you have an earnings test limit. Now this earnings test limit adjusts every single year. So last year, for perspective, it was around $19,000. This year, think of it like a high water mark. This year it is $21,240 or $1,770 a month. If you have earned income over that watermark and you are taking Social Security prior to your full retirement age, for every $2 over, $1 of your benefit will be withheld. So let's use a simple example to give you a little bit more perspective on how this works. Let's say that I start my benefit at 62 years old, obviously before my full retirement. And let's say that my benefit for the year is $20,000. Now remember, it's for every $2 over this watermark, $1 of my benefit is withheld. So I'm going to take that 2 for 1 multiple. I'm going to take my benefit, I'm going to multiply it by 2. That's $40,000. Okay, so if I earn $40,000 over this watermark, which is conveniently $61,240 in that example, let's say I earn $65,000 for the year, I'm going to have my entire benefit withheld. Okay, now withholding, don't confuse this with taxes. This withholding means that you actually have to pay the entire benefit back in that example. And or in many cases, it's a partial payback that you need to do. And that could be done by literally writing a check to Social Security, or they will just simply withhold your payments of Social Security benefit to you until they are made whole on what should have been done. So this is part of why I really think it's important to sit down with Emily, depending on what your thought is from a claiming standpoint, because if you are going to be in a situation where you might be subject to the earnings test limit, this can be an absolute headache to deal with. And the reason it can be such a headache, by the way, is because when you go to apply early, let's say you just applied online, it is a simple radio button, meaning you click yes or no, do you anticipate continuing to work? Now, what if you said no in that example because you really didn't anticipate to work, but then with the labor market being as tight as it is right now, maybe you end up getting an offer you can't refuse. You go work, you make that $65,000. What ends up happening is Social Security this whole over that entire year would have paid through your benefit. And then when the IRS reconciles what you made that previous year, you're going to get a letter from Social Security that says it has come to our attention there's been an overpayment of your benefit. What a nightmare situation to get into, right? So really important to have those conversations proactively on the front end. In the year in which you turn for retirement age, which is, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I'm circling it, it's that middle part there. That watermark does move up substantially from 21,240 to 56,520. And the multiple also changes, which a lot of folks don't realize. It goes from 2 to 1 for every $3 over that watermark, and $1 if your benefits help. Typically, if you're in that situation, it makes sense just to delay until you're full retirement age. Again, that's a general statement. Everyone's situation is obviously. So it's important to know about this, and this applies to any benefit. Any benefit. So a survivorship benefit, a spousal benefit, a divorcee benefit, and or your own Social Security benefit. The other thing I would just mention very quickly in terms of nuance with this is only earned income, and this is not a married filing jointly fee. So if you're married and you're starting your benefit early and you are retired but your spouse continues to work, their income is not going to impact you from an earnings standpoint. The other thing to know is passive income is not applicable here. You own farmland and you crop share. You own rental buildings and you have income from them. Depending on how you own them and ultimately how that's sourced, it is typically considered a passive income. You get a 1099-R for taking a distribution from a pre-tax retirement account, passive income, dividends, capital gains, etc. The income here, none of those are applicable. The income that the Social Security system is looking at and thinking about in terms of this watermark is specifically earned income. So think about it as income that is subject to payroll taxes and subject to FICA taxes. That's what we're talking about. So that's the earnings test limit. I hope you had a cup of coffee because I know that that's a boring slide, but an important one nonetheless to go to. Let's talk a little bit about spousal. I've been doing this 17 years, and this concept, I don't know why, was very obtuse for me. It took me a long time to learn. So if you leave this Zoom meeting feeling confused, don't stress, right? This is something that you can certainly revisit with Emily and dig into at a deeper level. Very normal to feel a little bit overwhelmed by this part of the topic. But let's talk about it because it's really important. So for spousal, you can take spousal even if you don't have those 40 quarters. You don't have a Social Security benefit of your own, you are still potentially eligible for spousal, even if you didn't work, right? So let's say that you were taking care of the kids at home or whatever it may be, and you don't have those earned income credits, you are still going to get a Social Security benefit, which is an important thing. Now, the situation with spousal, as you can see, I'm just moving where the cameras are here. So you can take, like your own benefit, you can take spousal as early as 62, but unlike your own benefit, if you recall from a couple slides ago, that grows all the way to age 70. Your spousal benefit maxes out at your respective full retirement age, 66, 67, or somewhere in between, depending on what your FRA is. Now, as you can see, like your own benefit, these percentages increase across the board. The gray here is just a 67 FRA. The blue is a 66. So as you can see, you can start as early as 62. It's just a little bit more reduced benefit for a 67 full retirement to be 32.5%, whereas the 35% for someone that's an FRA of 66, in both cases they max out at 50%. Now this is where it gets a little bit confusing, so I'm going to try and give some examples and some visuals hopefully to make it a little bit more clear. The natural question should be, what are these percentages based on? And typically, because most Americans take Social Security before their full retirement age, therefore they have a permanent reduction in their benefit, typically it's actually not based on the dollar amount the higher income individual or the higher benefits in a different way individual is actually bringing home in their check. Okay? This percentage is always based on what's called the PIA, primary insurance amount of the higher benefit individual, which is just a fancy Social Security jargon way of saying their full retirement age benefit. So remember the example I was giving earlier, my full retirement age benefit was $2,000. If I took early, it was some reduction of that. In the examples I gave, it was $1,500 or $1,400. But if my spouse takes spousal at full retirement age, she wouldn't get 50% of that reduced benefit, $1,500 to $1,400. She would still get 50% of what my full retirement age benefit was, which is $2,000. Unfortunately, that goes both ways, and I'll give you a little bit of visual in a moment here. But just to give you an idea of how this works, again, the higher benefit spouse is based on their full retirement age benefit, and then the decision of the lower benefit spouse as to when they take, that's what dictates the percentage itself. Now, one other caveat here that I think should be in bold and in much bigger writing is right here under requirements. It's the second bullet point, which is your spouse has to open the door for you to take a spousal benefit. They have to, the higher benefit individual has to claim Social Security to open the door for that benefit to become available. Okay? So I'll give you a couple visuals here and we'll actually walk through a scenario on how that works. In this case, we're going to do Diane and Jack. So we're switching up the old Jack and Diane, which is appropriate for here in Indiana. Sawmill donated a ton to IU the other day, which is pretty cool. So Diane is the higher earner in this situation, has the higher benefit. We're going to go with a full retirement age in this example of 67. So this $10,000 a year benefit for Diane is her base benefit. That's her full retirement age benefit. If she takes it from 62, I don't expect you memorized the chart earlier, but that would be a 30% reduction, $7,000. If she takes it 70, that would be 124%. So that's how we back into that $12,400. Now, again, she has to open the door for Jack to claim his benefit by claiming. We're going to make the assumption in the slides that I share next that she has opened the door, that she has claimed before Jack and all of these. Okay? So Diane starts her benefit at full retirement age. She gets that full $10,000. What does Jack get if he takes it 67? Well, that's its full retirement age in this example. If you recall, spousal maxes out at the full retirement age at 50%. So he's going to get $5,000. What if he took spousal at 62? Well, again, if we look at a full retirement age of 67, I don't expect you to memorize it. It's 32.5% if he chooses to take it 62. So his benefit is $3,250. Okay? What if Diane waits till 70? She gets those delayed retirement credits we were talking about. Maybe she has great longevity in her family, and her thought is, I'm going to live well into my 80s or 90s, so I'm going to wait and delay. Okay, she waits till 70, she gets this additional dollar. Now remember, we're at 50% and 32.5% for Jack. But is it based on this $12,400 figure that's Diane's benefit, or is it based on her full retirement age benefit? Remember, it's always going to be based spousal on that primary insurance amount, which is just this full retirement age benefit, which again gives a little bit of a heads up in terms of the next answer. But what if Diane took early? Instead of $10,000 a month or a year, excuse me, her benefit is $7,000. Well, what's Jack's respective spousal benefit if he takes it 62 or 67? Again, it's going to be the same. It's going to be $3,250 or the $5,000, because even though Diane a permanent reduction on her benefit, his spousal benefit is still going to be based on this full retirement age. So he's getting 32.5%, 50%, somewhere in between, based on the key claims. So that's how spousal works. You can start with, in terms of the excess spousal benefit, the lower earner, because remember, that higher earner has to, it's an auxiliary benefit. It's a benefit off of a benefit. So the higher earner has to open the door for spousal. Well, in the situation, and this can come up many times because of maybe age differences between spouses, in the situation where the lower benefit individual is going to start their benefit before the higher benefit individual, they can still do that. And then when that higher benefit individual claims, they get what's called a spousal step. And that's what this is talking about. They step up because they get this excess spousal benefit. Don't let this muddy the water for you. I'm going to give you an example right now. So let's say we have Alex, Blake, and Chris. Chris doesn't have a benefit of their own. Blake and Alex, their benefits $1,000 a month respectively, and their spousal benefits at full retirement age are $1,000 for Alex, so the same benefit as we'll say his own benefit. The spousal benefit for Blake is actually a little bit higher than his benefit if he were to take his own. Then, as I mentioned, Chris doesn't care for family in this example, so he doesn't have a benefit of his own and has a spousal benefit available at 67. So let's just walk through this example real quick. So we'll say that Chris receives the max spousal benefit because he takes at full retirement age. So they're getting that $1,200 a month. We'll say that Blake starts his benefit early. Now, I know that this is a lot of slides in short order, so let me just kind of do a quick review. Remember, if you look at the top here, Blake's benefit at full retirement age on his own is $1,000. Blake's spouse does not apply to him, right? So he's 62. Let's say they're the exact same age. He takes his benefit at 62. His spouse hasn't applied. They have not opened the door to that spousal benefit. So he starts with a reduced benefit on his own, which again, as we look here, his benefit is $1,000 at full retirement age. He's got a full retirement age of 67. That's a 30% reduction. So he starts at 62 with a benefit of $700 a month, which is a reduced benefit on his own benefit. Then his spouse starts their benefit at full retirement age. In doing so, opens the door for spousal to become available. Blake doesn't step up to the full $1,200 spousal benefit. He started early, so he carries forward that penalty for doing so, but he gets that excess spousal step. So he does get an additional $200 a month, which, as you look here, if he waited until full retirement age, is also the difference between his benefit and ultimately the spousal benefit. Again, I know that this is a lot of information very quickly. With respect to time, I'm going to continue moving. I'm sure for a lot of you there are questions here. Please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to address them. And or, as I mentioned, we think certainly back with that link would be hugely helpful. And then Alex. Now remember, in Alex's situation, his benefit and the spousal benefit are exactly the same. So if he starts his benefit early, when his spouse claims their benefit, there's no step up, because his benefit and the spousal benefit are exactly the same. So there's no excess spousal amount to be had in this scenario. So I know that's a lot, but let's move on to survivorship with respect to time, because I think survivorship is so important, and it's probably the most misunderstood part of system. So hugely important, tremendously misunderstood. That's a bad combination. Hopefully we can shed some light on that for all of you today. If you think back to spousal for a moment, okay, your decision as the higher benefit individual doesn't have an impact on the lower benefit individual outside of just opening the door. In other words, when you claim opens the door for them to take spousal, but it's their decision between 62 or their full retirement age that impacts the percentage they're going to receive. And your decision is to taking early or delaying, that doesn't change anything, right? Because ultimately your reduction or your delayed retirement credits don't impact their spousal benefit. Survivorship, leave it to survivorship is totally different. So your decision as the higher benefit individual absolutely has an impact on the survivorship benefit of yourself, if you're the survivor, and or the lower benefit individual if you're married, and their survivorship benefit. So said a different way, if you take early, if you have a reduced benefit, ultimately that penalty continues on in survivorship, just like if you delay, if there's delayed retirement credits, you get those increases, that also goes on. You can take survivorship as early as age 60, regardless of your full retirement age. If you're looking at 67 would be the gray bar, 66 is blue. It starts at 71.5% and then moves up to 100% as you approach your full retirement age. Technically, it's actually before that, but as you approach your full retirement age. The question again should be, what are these percentages of? And they're essentially, I'm taking a little bit of liberty here because there's some nuance here that I don't want to muddy the water too much with, but they are essentially going to be based on the benefit the higher benefit individual was receiving. Said a different way, the higher benefit remains in a survivorship scheme. Okay? So let me give you an example at a personal level to provide a little bit of perspective of how important this is and what its impact might be on your claiming thoughts. And please don't think that I'm trying to push anyone towards a decision here. It's just hopefully to give you a little bit more perspective on how this works. So I am a Ghormley. Ghormley men don't live very long. We'll just leave it at that. We are shooting stars, as my wife said. We're bright, we're brief, we're bold, and we're gone. My grandfather was the first Ghormley male to live past 75. Okay? So think back to the crossover that we were talking about earlier. Do you remember the ages, right? 62 to full retirement age, that crossover is about 78 years old. 62 to 70, if you should choose to delay all the way till 70, that crossover is about 82 years old. So if my longevity, and this is, just the truth of my situation is that I will most likely live to my mid-70s, well then I should take early. And you're not going to hear a lot of Social Security specialists tell you that they would take early. But if it were me on my own, and thank the Lord it's not, if it were me on my own, I would take early all day long with my sunset. Right? Now, I'm married to a Hassan-Bassi. That's my wife's maiden name. Her dad's name is Refit Hassan-Bassi. Came over on a boat from Germany when he was a little boy. The women in her family shoveled the driveway at 95. Like, have tremendous longevity. And she's about a year and a half younger than me on top of that. So let's go back to the example I gave earlier, and then let's think about it through the lens of what we just learned from a survivorship standpoint. So let's say that my full retirement age benefit is $2,000 a month, and let's say that my wife takes spousal off of me, and she takes spousal at full retirement age, which, as you just learned, is 50% of my full retirement age benefit. So she's receiving $1,000 a month in spousal. Okay? If I choose to take at 62, I get a 30% reduction. So I'm collecting $1,400 a month. Now let's say she took spousal at full retirement, so she's still getting the $1,000. If I pass away at 75, which is beyond 67, so she steps into 100% of my benefit. Again, I'm taking a little bit of liberty here because there's technically the widower's limit, which changes this just fractionally. But again, with respect to time, we're just giving some general information here. She essentially steps up to basically $1,400. It would be marginally higher. Okay? She steps up to $1,400 a month from $1,000. Now, the way that this works is the higher benefit remains, the other one drops off. So together we were collecting $2,400 in that example, my $1,400 for $1,000. After I pass and she survives me, she's collecting $1,400. So her benefit essentially falls off. Okay? Now, in that scenario, compare it to what if I waited all the way till 70? I'm collecting $2,480. If you recall, 124% of that full retirement benefit is $2,000. So if I choose to delay till 70, and let's just say, for example, say she takes spousal, she's getting $1,000 a month, and I pass away at 75, she steps up from $1,000 to $2,480. It's over $1,000 a month difference based on my decision. So all of a sudden, because of our joint life expectancy, my situation goes from no brainer if I'm on my own taking it 62 to, given our situation, given her longevity, no brainer for me delaying all the way till 70. Because that $1,000 a month over her longevity leads to over 6 figures difference comparing the two in terms of what she would actually receive and what we as a couple would receive from Social Security versus the contrary should I take early retirement. Again, I want to be clear, I'm not trying to push that onto everyone else. Everyone's situation is unique. And not only is it unique from a health situation, but we all have our personal preferences. And Social Security is certainly a personal choice. So let me move forward here because I do want to stick to time. I'm coming up towards the end of this. At the end of the day, even if that lower benefit individual, which we're giving an example here, if they take early, they have a penalty. In this example, the lower earner is taking at 62. When they step up from a survivorship standpoint, and in this example we did 75, they don't carry that penalty forward. Okay, so again, that's something where we, as I mentioned, there's a lot of nuance and dynamic to everyone's situation. Some people have similar ages to their spouse. Some people obviously aren't married. Some people are divorced. Some people have larger differences between those ages. That will create some planning dynamics to discuss. This is just a visual to show how significant in aggregate the difference in benefits can be should we take early and or delay. We covered that essentially. So one thing to know, and I'm going to be very brief on this, but this is important, is if you do lose your spouse, especially if you lose your spouse earlier at a younger age, there are some important things to know. Remember, spousals and auxiliary benefits, benefit off of a benefit, survivorship are two different benefits. So you can take your own benefit early and have a reduced benefit, and then let your survivorship benefit continue to grow, and then take that, switch to that at full retirement age, if that makes sense. And or you can start with a reduced survivorship benefit, let your benefit go all the way till 70, if that makes sense. Just know that there are switch up options. And if you or a loved one, whether they're local here or from someone else somewhere else in the country, they would benefit from having a discussion throughout the dinner in that situation. It is incredibly important and to make a life-changing difference. So please do connect with me heavily as soon as possible. Now, finally, in terms of divorcee benefits, I'll be pretty brief here because basically the way that divorcee benefits work is if you were married for 10 consecutive years, it has to be 10 years or longer. There's a lot of lawsuits out there. Folks who were married for 9 years and 10 months and now aren't eligible for Social Security benefits off the previous spouse. But if you were married for 10 consecutive years and that marriage ended in divorce, etc., you are eligible to take essentially what would be a divorcee benefit, which is essentially a spousal benefit off of a previous spouse. All the rules are exactly the same outside of two exceptions. You can't be remarried and collect a divorcee benefit. And on top of that, the higher benefit individual, if you recall from when you're married, they have to open the door to you taking the benefit. In this case, because Social Security does not want to be in a situation where they're allowing that higher benefit individual to put someone into hardship because they don't have an amicable divorce, all that higher benefit individual needs to be is age 62, deceased or disabled. So they have to have what we call a qualifying event. So again, as long as that individual is 62 and you were married for 10 plus consecutive years and you are no longer married, you are eligible for a spousal benefit off of them. Now, if your benefit is higher than that spousal benefit, it's a moot point. So just keep that in mind. You're not going to collect both of them and or collect one and let the other go. That's not how it works. At the end of the day, when you file, it's called a file, which means you are eligible for the highest benefit that you are able to get from Social Security. Now, one exception to the remarried situation is a survivorship benefit off of an ex or deceased spouse. If you get remarried prior to age 65, you are not allowed to collect a benefit off a deceased spouse that you were married to prior. If, however, you get remarried after age 60, that rule does not apply. So if you get remarried after age 60, you can collect either your own benefit, a spousal benefit off of your new spouse, and or a survivorship benefit off of your new spouse. And then finally, I will just mention that consecutive marriages that end in annulment, divorce, or death, that would reopen the door for you to take off of a previous spouse. And I actually have a quick visual here for you in a moment. But real quick, before I go through that visual, if your former spouse remarries, it does not change your ability to take a benefit off of them. And again, just remember that age 60 from a survivorship standpoint. If you're married before age 60, you cannot take survivorship off of previous spouse after age 60. Okay? In either case, if you get remarried, you cannot take a divorcee. So that survivorship, divorcee is important items. Real quick example, if Chris was married to spouse A, they were married for 15 years, which is obviously more than the 10-year requirement. They were divorced, spouse A passes away, then in this example, Chris gets married to spouse B at 45, before age 60, and then they're married for 10 years and they get divorced. Ultimately, here's the situation. Chris has the choice, taking their own retirement benefit, if that's the higher of all of these options. They can take survivorship benefit off of spouse A because the second marriage, even though it started before age 60, it has ended. So again, it ends in annulment or divorce. It reopens the ability to take off the previous spouse. Spouse A has passed, so they can take survivorship off of spouse A, and or because Chris was married to spouse B for 10 plus years as well, they can take spousal or eventually survivorship off spouse B. So there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of dynamic to this, but you've got to resource it. And I apologize, Emily, you're probably going to have a million calls after this. Telling folks to hit you up, but seriously, what a great opportunity to make sure that you're getting what you deserve from Social Security. And I call that the Johnny Carson rule in terms of spousal, by the way. Because Johnny Carson had 5 lovely ladies taking Social Security off at one time, which is pretty amazing if you think about the 10-year plus rule. So, anyhow, I told you I'd be very brief on the taxes conversation because I want to fly this or bring this in for a landing in the next, call it 2 minutes. I just want to give you perspective on how taxation works. I'm going to go forward a slide and then back up. So don't worry, I'll go back to that slide I just showed you. When it comes to taxation, Social Security uses a unique income, which is called combined income. Your combined income is your adjusted gross income, and this is a married filing jointly number. If you recall, we were talking about the earnings test limit. That's not a married filing jointly figure if you're married. Okay? This is, you take your AGI, they add back in tax-exempt income. What would be an example of tax-exempt income? Let's say you own a municipal bond here in Indiana, federally tax-free. Well, we got to add that back in for the purposes of combined income. Then they take half of your Social Security benefit. That's your combined income. They then put it through this grid. Okay? If you're an individual, you can see the numbers here. I'm just going to read off the married filing jointly. With respect to time, if your combined income is less than $32,000, none of your Social Security income will be considered taxable. If it's between $32,000 and $44,000, up to 50% of your Social Security income will be considered taxable income and will be applied at whatever marginal rate when they stack it on top of your income, whatever marginal rate will be taxed on. So it's not taxed at 50%, but 50% of your benefit would be considered taxable. Finally, once you get over 44,000, and yes, these are antiquated numbers, and no, they're not going to be moving higher anytime soon, but up to 85% of Social Security benefit may be taxable. So if you want to look at this as a glass is 15% full type scenario, in a worst case scenario where 85% of your benefit is taxable income, that's still 15% of that is tax free. So I suppose maybe I'm looking too much for through rose-colored glasses. So all we need to do that is just a quick conversation from a planning standpoint. What sort of items are not considered earned income? Well, Roth distributions, whether that's IRA or retirement in order to keep them before you're needing to take RMDs, again, non-taxable event, philanthropically, non-taxable portion of pensions and annuities, inheritance and gifts, life insurance proceeds, depending on how they're owned, but typically tax-free. And finally, health savings account withdrawals for qualified medical expenses. Lots of asterisks on this page. So, of course, have a discussion with the team. Make sure that, from a planning standpoint, that not only are we maximizing your benefit and what makes sense for you and your spouse, but ultimately doing it in a tax-sensitive way, as much money out of the same pocket as we possibly can, which is kind of the goal all the time. Now, finally, I just close with this, a little bit of a rule of thumb. I'm not a huge fan of rule of thumbs, but nonetheless, a lot of questions. How long are you going to work? What's your withdrawal rate? Thinking about that longevity, that's an important part of this. If you're an individual and you have average life expectancy, typically it can make sense to take earlier. But if you have a longer life expectancy, it does typically make sense to wait there. For someone married, spouse with a lower Social Security benefit, it's not as big of a deal for them to start early if that's necessary and important. But the individual with a higher benefit, typically, and that's the example I gave in my situation, typically does make sense to delay and hopefully be able to delay. So thank you for your time. Again, I know that that's a lot of information very quickly, but hopefully it gives you a little bit more confidence, conviction in how this system works. And if anything, and if nothing else, I guess I should say, you know that you've got some great resources available with the team and with Emily's real focus on this as well as the planning in general. With that said, I'm going to turn it back over and I'll leave this slide up. Let's see, I just wrote it in a second. Let's see if I can change those back to grace. This would be incredible, folks, if I can do this. Yeah. Awesome. Probably didn't throw in. It took the slide off, so I apologize for that. If you can reshare your screen so you have the information.
Yeah, the information was also shared in email, the reminder email sent to you guys. And feel free to just reach out to our office and work it out. I did want to throw a few questions your way if we had a few minutes. And if we can go through those, we'll start there. The first question that came in is related to the earnings limit.
Yeah.
So you're still working and receiving Social Security. Is the earnings limit based on gross wages or adjusted wages?
Good question. Yes, based on gross wages, right? So at the end of the day, we can't take, let's say that I have earned income of $30,000.
Recording in progress.
I want to get under that earnings test limit. I can't throw $9,000 into my 401k and all of a sudden, right? So they're going to use, and the way to think of that, I know that that seems like a negative, but that's because that's the income they're giving you credit for in your benefit, right? So you're paying payroll taxes to your employer on those going to Social Security. They're trying to give you credit for them in that instance. Unfortunately, it does create a challenge if you're taking
And the second question that came in says, my wife and I both started taking Social Security benefits at age 70, but her benefit is less than mine. Can she now apply for spousal benefits?
Great question. So spousal maxes at 50%, right? And remember, it maxes at 50% of your primary insurance. So because you delayed till 70, you got all these great delayed retirement credits, and both of you did, it sounds like in this example. But if the math of it is that 50% of your full retirement age benefit is, and it sounds like it is, significantly less than what she's receiving in her benefit, then she's going to continue taking her benefit. Even though it's less than yours, it's still going to be significantly larger than spousal. But the fact is, there are scenarios where Social Security does mess up. So even though when you file, it's a deemed filing, and you should get what you're eligible for in terms of highest benefit to, I would just tell you, my mother, as an example, was receiving $20 less spousal. So there are instances where that can happen. But in that situation, it sounds like your benefits, even though the spouse who has the lower benefit is a little bit less, it most likely is such that their benefit is still much larger than the spouse. So you're going to take whichever is higher. Your own benefit equal that spouse.
That leads me to another question, a related question, and that's, is the spousal step up? So in this case, the retirement benefit is less than the spousal benefit. Is it automatic, or do you have to request it?
So it should happen automatically, but I don't trust the government to do anything automatically, and I don't work for Social Security, so you can't get mad at me for saying that. So again, my mom's situation is a perfect example. What should have happened there is it should have automatically gone from spousal to her own benefit, but it didn't. And that's why I recommend folks, if you haven't logged into that SSA portal and taken a look at your earnings history, that's such a fundamentally important part of calculating your benefit. And there are many times where those numbers are inaccurate. So it's supposed to happen automatically in an excess spousal situation, yes. But again, I think it's worth setting up a phone call anyways. And I will tell you, the local Social Security representation, they're far better than anyone else. They do a great job, and they'll be able to make sure the most of the time.
Yeah. Another question related to spousal benefits. In order to get spousal benefits, you both need to be born before 1954.
No, to do a restricted application, you need to have been born January 1st, 1954 or earlier. And with respect to not muddying the water, I won't go quite through what that is. If you were born January 1st, 1954 or earlier, call Emily after this. We'll leave it at that. But no, spousal is available. You just have to have been married to your spouse for more than a year, essentially. And it becomes available as soon as that individual starts taking their benefit. That's what opens the door. But if you're born time age is 67, which is anybody born 1960 or earlier, you absolutely can still take a spousal benefit. So if I gave an indication that wasn't the case, I'm glad you asked.
Another question here, does the survivor benefit grow past full retirement age?
Yes. So essentially, 100% part of it doesn't. In other words, like me being able to step into the benefit of the higher benefit. Let's use an example because I can see the question. So let's go back to my example with my wife. Okay. Now, my wife has significantly more longevity than I do, so I'm going to delay until 7. That's our plan. Okay. My benefit continues to grow beyond my full retirement age. It grows all the way till 70 because I'm full retirement age of 67. That would be 124% of my full retirement age, whatever that is. Okay. So in that sense, it does continue to grow. Now, if let's say that I pass away at 75, just based on my wife and I's ages, let's say we're similar age, we both will be taking our benefits at that point. And so at that point, she steps into 100% of my benefit. Okay, that's regardless of whether she took it 62, full retirement age, or 70. Okay, so whenever she takes, there's no reduction that carries forward. There's no penalty that carries forward. If God forbid I would pass away tomorrow, okay, in that scenario, I haven't taken my benefit. We actually didn't go through this. It's actually kind of a nuanced talk. My wife would get credit for my primary insurance. Okay, so if you pass away prior to claiming, the survivorship benefit is based on the primary insurance. But remember, the percentage starts at 71.5 at age 60 and maxes out. It's actually technically just before your full retirement age at 100%. So what that percentage is alluding to is what percentage of this primary insurance amount. So if she started survivorship at 60, remember she would subject to the earnings assessment, by the way. She would get 71.5. Let's just say my benefit is $1,000. Where was $62,000? should be getting, $1,420. Does that make sense? She waits all the way till full retirement age, she should be getting the full $2,000. Beyond full retirement age, in that example, the benefit does not. She does not get any additional beyond.
Okay, good.
Part of it.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. So it is never beneficial to wait to claim a survivor benefit after full retirement age as a widow.
Correct. Yeah, remember you switch them off. So let's say your benefit is similar to theirs. Okay? Let's say my wife's benefit in that example, which is use really simple example. Let's say we're both 67 and I pass away and I have to take my primary insurance now is $2,000. So let's say my wife's benefit is $2,000. She would start the survivorship benefit right then and there. Because to your point, there's no benefit in her delaying. She would collect $2,000 a month because she's full retirement age. She's not subject to the earnings test. So she could also keep working. But remember, these are two different benefits. So her $2,000 benefit continues to grow until 70. And then she could switch from survivorship to her own benefit, which is not part of the $2,000. The vast majority of individuals don't understand that switch up dynamic, and it makes a world of difference in terms of the income.
One last question for you, and then we'll wrap, and that is, do benefits begin automatically?
No. No. Yeah, and it's a shame because you'll have folks who are 72, and you can only back file up to 6 months. So the answer is no. You have to go and claim. Now you can claim online. It's actually very easy. But I personally like to meet with people face to face, despite the fact that we're all training each other virtually. No, you need to file as an active thing, right? So you have to make that. And again, once you get past full retirement age, when you clarify, you can't back file 6 months anytime you want. Once you get past full retirement age, you can back file however many months you are past up to 6 months. So if you're 72, you back file 6 months, and this means you're missed out on a year and a half of Social Security benefits. So no, it does not happen automatically. You need to take an action.
And I'm just going to ask one more question.
Oh, come on.
I recommend that someone files. So let's say they're getting ready to do
3 months in advance. Yep, and what I recommend is they have a meeting with you 6 months in advance. Is that a good question, or is that a good answer?
Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome.
Okay, well that covers the questions that came in through the Q&A. So thank you for attending, everyone, and thank you for those that participated via the Q&A. I work closely with Brooke and Lizzie and Grace and Ian, and we'll take your whole financial picture into account when we do the Social Security analysis for you. So Dave, thank you so much for imparting your wisdom and sharing your story with us today. And we appreciate everyone's. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.